The Russians are one of the world's major exporters of LNG, both from from their northern coast in the Arctic, as well as from the Sakhalin projects. And those are all going to go down for lack of foreign partners and tech. And if we have a follow-on dust up in a place like the Persian Gulf, then we're looking at Qatari natural gas potentially falling offline as well. But you know Canadian internal politics better than I do. If you want to bring the natural gas from Alberta, and let's be honest, that's where almost all of it is, if you go east, that's a lot of provinces that can say no for whatever reason that they want. And even if everyone says yes on day one, you still then have to build the liquefaction facility and the pipeline, and that's a multi-year project. That's not going to be soon enough to help the Germans. Now, if you go west through BC, that wouldn't take nearly as much time. And that, because the Japanese are not facing an acute crunch, they've got a little bit more time that they could, in theory, get by without it. One thing about the Germans is they have systematically shut down one part of their energy system after another. And so they're now completely dependent on lignite and natural gas from Russia. Now they've lost the natural gas. So Germany is now one of the most carbon dirty countries on the planet. Japan's different. They don't have a unified grid. Every city has an LNG import facility, a coal burning facility, what little green tech they can get, and they have some tidal stuff, and they have LNG import facilities. So each one is used to shuffling things around, and if you can throw LNG into that mix, they will all do better, but it's not as critical as it is for the Germans. But mostly the Japanese have more time. Well, natural gas, if you're going to burn it for power, as a rule generates roughly half of the carbon that a coal plant will. So in terms of net increase, if you just look at the German case where they're burning lignite, it's a lot more than that. So, that's a gain. The environmental push to get rid of all fossil fuels in most places is actually increasing our carbon footprint. If you're in a place like Germany that doesn't have good wind potential outside of the North Sea and no good solar potential anywhere, putting up solar panels actually increases the amount of carbon that you're putting into the system because they're never going to generate enough power to pay it back down. In addition, Germany only gets sun for a few weeks of the year in the summer when everyone's on vacation. So when you're actually doing the hard work of living and working, you're going to be running off of something that has to run either at night, which is peak demand in Germany, or at a time when the sun's not shining very bright because it's the winter. So you're never going to get rid of the fossil fuel in the nuclear-based system. And if you build another system on top of it that doesn't work very well, you're just putting more carbon into the system. Now, that story is different in every part of the planet. If you're in a sunny location, like, say, Southern California, by all means, for God's sakes, do solar. If you're in the Great Plains or the Prairie Provinces, do wind. It's brilliant. But you've got to match the technologies to where you are. And one of the advantages of liquefied natural gas is it's the lowest carbon fossil fuel, and it's portable in concentrated form. And for most parts of the world, that is actually the greenest fuel source that you're going to be able to hope to get. Hydrogen is new, so it's difficult to project what it's going to look like in 10, 20, and 30 years, both from a cost and a carbon point of view. But what we know right now, with the technology we have now, it is the dirtiest fuel source on the planet. Making hydrogen using something other than natural gas as the feedstock means you're using carbon dioxide, oxygen, and water. And those three molecules are the most stable molecules that we are aware of on this planet. So the amount of energy that it takes to break them into something else in order to form methanol and then get hydrogen is the most exothermic reaction that you can do at scale. So anyone who's doing hydrogen with today's technology is actually just setting up a massive carbon bomb. Now, the theory is if we build out more and more and more wind and solar in places that are both windy and sunny, then the energy is free, and it doesn't matter how much energy it takes in order to generate those reactions. But there is no place on the planet right now where that exists, and there is no place in Europe at all that has the wind or the solar potential in order to do this at scale, except for maybe Scotland. And now we're wrapped up in Brexit and the Scottish independence movement. It's just there just aren't many places where this works. as we understand the technology now. Now, you change the technology, and 20 years from now, it will obviously look different. I will reserve the right to change my mind. But right now, that would actually make our carbon problems far more intensive than they already are. There are 3 nutrients that allow us to grow plants. Potash, of which Canada is a world leader. At the moment, that is not triggering the green community. Phosphate, for which North America as a unit is broadly self-sufficient. The Greens are not upset about that. And nitrogen. Arguably, nitrogen is the most important of the 3, and nitrogen is what some folks are trying to get rid of. You cannot maintain output levels without high levels of nitrogen fertilizer. Now, the day may come where we have a technology where we can do that in a way with fewer emissions and less runoff. That technology does not exist today. So if Canada does go down this path, it removes itself from being one of the world's massive agricultural exporters, and that will kill several hundred million people. That's a value balance, green versus humanitarian life support. Now, if every agricultural zone is dealing with some version of this question moving forward, because there's a lot of fertilizer disruption coming out of the former Soviet Union, and we all need to find ways to improve efficiencies and output, and using less fertilizer should not be on that list, in my opinion. So the American demographic situation is changing, and based on who you are, that's either very good or very bad, but it's nothing compared to the titanic shifts we're seeing everywhere else. Now, America's millennials, they are providing consumption now to support the American economic system, and in a few years, they will be providing the investment as they get into their 50s, and their children will also be a large generation. They're just now being born, and that will round up the labor market 20 years from now. So in the United States, you only have to wait 10 years for a better capital environment, and you only have to wait 20 years for a better labor environment. But holy crap, look at everybody else. The German system, it was terminal 40 years ago. They're not running out of children. That happened 20 years ago. They're now running out of working-aged adults. And we are going to see some degree of industrial collapse in the German space by the end of the decade, assuming nothing else wrecks it before then. And some of the outcomes of the Ukraine war may well do that in the next 2 years. And then there's China. China's workforce is already the world's fastest aging, and we now know that this data is wrong. The Chinese about a year ago started admitting publicly that they've overcounted their population by at least 100 million people, with all of the missing millions people who would have been born since the one-child policy was adopted 40 years ago, meaning that they're all under 40. We don't have an economic theory for what would work with this demographic in 2030. We are in the final decade of the Chinese country, and there's all kinds of things that have to do with energy or food or fertilizer or manufacturing or trade or war that could end this sooner. But China's use-by date is just 8 years away at this point.